He'd lived alone for 10 long years, expecting no one, dreaming of nothing. But that rainy night, when a girl in a torn wedding dress collapsed on his porch, blood on her hem, fear in her eyes, Eli McKay knew the peace he'd carved out here was done for. It had been 10 winters since anyone set foot on Eli Mercer's land. 10 years since he'd spoken more than 5 words to another soul. He liked it that way, just him, the wind and the ghosts that came and went, with the seasons up in Juniper Flats. But that night, the rain didn't just fall, it roared. It lashed the windows like a sheriff's fists pounding on a saloon door, and the wind howled down from Sagebrush Ridge with the voice of something wild and wronged. Eli was just settling into his old rocker with a cup of coffee when he heard it. Not the wind, not the rain, something else. A voice, faint, carried in the storm, just above the rattling of the eaves and the clatter of wind-bent shutters. "Don't let him find me." He froze. The voice hadn't come from a memory. It was outside, real and hurting. Eli grabbed the lantern and stepped out onto the porch, rain instantly soaking into his flannel shirt. His boots made no sound on the drenched planks as he followed the source of the whisper. And then he saw her, a woman crumpled against the steps like a broken thing tossed from the heavens. White dress, no, gray now with mud and storm, clung to her like it had been sewn onto her skin. Lace shredded, veil torn, hair plastered to her face. Her chest rose shallowly, just enough to say she wasn't dead. Not yet. Eli crouched beside her, hand shaking as he reached to touch her neck, still warm, still breathing, but it wasn't the cold or her bruised wrist that stopped him cold. It was the sight of her face. She was young, maybe mid-20s, skin pale as bone china, lips blue, but more than that, it was the look on her even in unconsciousness. That look of someone who'd run farther than they thought they could, from something or someone worse than death. Eli knew that look. He'd seen it once in a mirror 10 years ago, the morning he found Lila Hart's body, pulled from the Copper Ridge River, and a letter she never meant to send half burned in his fireplace. Eli stood still for a long moment, coffee cooling in his other hand, staring at this stranger dumped at his doorstep like some cruel joke carved in rain and lace. He could leave her there. Let the storm finish what it had started. The law wouldn't question it. No one would even know. But then, hell, he saw it, just under the lace sleeve of her soaked dress. Purple bruises shaped like fingers dug into her skin like possession, and that made his blood go hot. He cursed low under his breath, tossed the mug into the dark, and scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, like carrying a shadow made of silk and cold regret. As he kicked open his front door, the fire inside flickered and spat, casting gold across the old wooden floors he hadn't let anyone tread on in a decade. He laid her gently on the worn-out couch, the same couch he used to sit on, with a bottle in one hand and a revolver in the other, thinking maybe the world had already ended and he'd just forgotten to bury himself. She stirred. Only a little. Her eyelids fluttered, green eyes cracking open, dazed and full of something like fear, or maybe relief. Her lips moved, soundless, and then she was out again. Eli just stared at her, heart pounding harder than it had since he hung up his badge. Hope. He hated that word. It was the most dangerous thing in the world, more deadly than a six-shooter, more cruel than any outlaw. But he felt it, and he knew. Whatever storm had driven this woman to his porch wasn't just weather, it was a reckoning. Inside the cabin, the fire hissed as rainwater dripped from his coat to the stone hearth. Outside, thunder cracked again, but this time Eli heard something different. From beyond the ridge, faint but unmistakable, came the metallic clank of metal striking metal, not thunder, not wind, maybe chains, maybe stirrups, maybe a hammer pulling back on a revolver. He turned to the door. Had she brought the storm with her? The first thing she felt was heat. Not the blistering kind that comes with sunstroke or fever, but a deep, steady warmth, like being wrapped in a memory too old to touch. Then came the smell. Wood smoke, wool, and something faint underneath, coffee and stew. Cora Delaney opened her eyes slow, careful, like a woman unsure if she was waking from a dream or into one. The ceiling above her was timbered, low and solid. The fire crackled in a stone hearth a few feet away. She was lying on a couch, rough wool beneath her cheek, a heavy blanket pulled to her chin. Her fingers gripped it instinctively. She was no longer wearing the dress. Panic surged like lightning through her chest. She sat up too fast, head spinning, eyes wild. The blanket stayed tight against her, clutched like a shield. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it wanted out. Across the room, a man sat in a wooden chair, just watching, not moving, hands folded loose in his lap. He didn't look surprised to see her awake. "You're all right," he said. His voice was low, worn, like a boot heel dragging through gravel. "You passed out cold." His face was sharp in the firelight, lined and weathered, with steel-gray eyes that didn't blink much. He looked like he belonged to the land itself, carved out of wind and time. Cora's throat was dry, voice barely more than a scrape. Where am I?" "My ranch, middle of nowhere, Nevada side of Sagebrush Ridge." He leaned forward a bit, elbows on his knees. "Which I'm guessing is exactly where you were aiming to get to." She scanned the room. Stone, wood, no signs of other people. Just one door, two windows. The wedding dress hung from a line strung above the fireplace, still dripping. Her stomach turned. "I had to get you out of it," he said, guessing her thought. "It was soaked through, you'd have froze." He jerked his chin toward the table. Clothes there. Belonged to someone else once. Cora caught the weight in that pause. Someone else. Wife, probably. Or a woman who didn't stay. "Thank you," she said, voice stiff. "But what do you want?" He didn't flinch, just blinked slow, like the question took him off guard. "Nothing." That made her uneasy. She'd learned the hard way. Nothing ever came free. Not shelter, not safety, especially not for men. She shifted on the couch, eyes scanning again for anything, weapon, exit, threat. The man, Eli, stayed still. Only his eyes moved, tracking hers like he knew exactly what she was doing. "The storm's still ripping through the ridge," he said. "You leave now, you'll drown before you hit the foothills." "I can't stay here," she whispered. "They'll find me." "Who's they?" Cora hesitated. The words caught in her throat, too thick with fear. Her hand drifted toward her wrist, fingers brushing the bruises beneath the blanket. Eli's eyes darkened, not in anger, in recognition. "I used to be sheriff down in Copper Ridge," he said quietly. "I've seen marks like that before." Cora looked away. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "My brother owes money. He gambled it away and couldn't pay. Harlan Pike offered him a deal, my hand, in exchange for clearing the debt." Her jaw tightened. Today was the wedding. Eli said nothing, but the line of his shoulders stiffened. "I ran," she continued. "Took a horse from the stables. I thought I could lose them in the canyon before the rain came. I didn't know how close this place was. I just rode." Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble was already here," Eli muttered, rising from the chair. He stepped to the window, parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Rain still fell hard, but the wind had slowed. "Harlan Pike," he said without turning. "That name's been a stain on Nevada since I was still pinning on a badge. Owns half the mines and thinks he owns the people, too." "He'll send his men," Cora said. "He won't stop. He doesn't like being embarrassed." "I know his kind. He'll kill you just for letting me stay here." Eli turned, stepped over to the gun rack, and lifted a rifle that looked well oiled despite its age. His fingers moved over it with practiced ease. Been 10 years since I've had a good reason to use this. He looked her dead in the eyes. Might be time to remember what it feels like. Cora's breath caught. Outside, beyond the walls of this old wooden cabin, thunder echoed again. But softer now, retreating. The storm was moving off, but inside her chest, a different kind of storm was just starting to build. And then, just as Eli moved toward the window again, they both heard it, distant, barely louder than the hush of the rain on the roof. But there, hoofbeats, more than one, and getting closer. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady as a judge's gavel, slow, unhurried, but certain. Eli stood by the window, jaw tight. Cora had backed away from the fire, clutching the blanket closer, eyes locked on the door like it might vanish if she blinked. Then the knock came, not frantic, not polite, just 3 short thumps on wood like punctuation marks on a threat. Eli didn't answer right away. He stepped to the rifle again, checked the chamber, then moved to the door with the kind of calm that only comes from seeing too many men die. He opened it a few inches, just enough to show he wasn't afraid. Rain still fell in silver threads, but the storm had mostly passed. Out there in the mud, 5 horses stood, 5 riders. The man in front sat tall and smug in a dark coat, broad-brimmed hat low over his eyes. His boots gleamed despite the trail. His gloves were red leather, slick like something butchered. Cora stepped to the edge of the doorway, hidden in the shadows, heart thudding. "Evening, Mr. Bennett," the rider said, voice smooth as oil. "Been a long while." "Not long enough, Rake," Eli replied. Rake Henson grinned, the kind of grin that didn't reach the eyes. "Heard you been living up here like a ghost. Didn't think ghosts left the door open." "Didn't think wolves rode with wedding bands," Eli said, stepping out onto the porch. Behind him, the fire crackled. Inside, Cora grabbed the coat Eli had laid near the hearth, not for warmth, for the knife in the pocket. "Cut the pretty talk, old man," Rake said, his grin fading. "You know why we're here. That girl don't belong to you. She don't belong to anyone. That ain't what Pike says. She's his bride now." "Then maybe he should have kept a better grip on her." One of the other riders, young, twitchy, finger never far from the trigger, shifted in the saddle. Rake held up a hand, stopping him. His eyes stayed on Eli. "We ain't here for blood. Pike wants her back in one piece. But if we gotta take her out of your walls with force, well, that's on you." Eli took one step forward. His boots squelched in the mud, but his hands were steady. "You walk onto my land with threats and firepower and expect me to just hand over a girl bleeding and running for her life?" He leaned his weight onto one heel. "You think I'm that old?" "I think you're outnumbered," Rake said. Behind the men, one of the horses shifted, mud splashed, but Eli wasn't looking at them anymore. He was watching the side of the cabin. One of the riders had peeled off, quiet, creeping through the shadows, circling to the back of the house. Cora saw it too, through the side window. She whispered, "They're flanking." Eli didn't move, didn't blink, just raised his voice a notch, enough to carry. "You bring 5 men to scare 1 woman and 1 rancher? That's weak, Rake, even for you." "You gonna make this hard?" Rake asked. "No," Eli said. "You are." Then he whistled. It was short, sharp, echoed through the trees. From the barn there was a bark, then 2. A shape tore from the darkness. Bear, the ranch dog, old but mean as hell, charging with teeth bared. The rider, sneaking round the back, never saw it coming. His horse reared as Bear lunged, snapping at the man's boot. Gunfire cracked. 1 shot, wild. Eli used that second. He pivoted, rifle to shoulder, barrel leveled straight at Rake. "Call him off," Eli barked. "Now." Rake's men froze. The rider from the back limped into view, dragging his leg. Bear snarling behind him. Rake's face twisted, but he raised a hand. "Stand down," he said through clenched teeth. Eli lowered the rifle, barely. Rake spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." "No," Eli agreed. "It's just beginning." The riders turned. Mud splattered as they kicked their horses around. No words, no threats, just silence hanging like smoke. But Eli didn't move until they disappeared beyond the hill. Only then did he glance at Cora. "You all right?" She nodded. Just barely. From inside her coat pocket, she pulled the knife. She didn't hand it back, and Eli didn't ask. The storm had passed, but the night stayed heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, and shadows danced lazy across the walls. Eli sat in his old chair by the hearth, a worn blanket draped across his shoulders, though he wasn't cold. Cora perched on the edge of the bed, eyes flicking between the firelight and the rifle leaning against the doorframe. Neither spoke at first, not until Eli reached into the drawer of the side table, pulled out a bottle of rye that hadn't seen daylight in 4 years, and poured 2 fingers into a tin cup. He held it out. "You look like you could use this more than I do." Cora didn't answer, but she took the cup with a quiet nod. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear anymore, from knowing something had shifted. Eli leaned back, stared into the fire, and after a long pause he said, "You remind me of someone." Cora looked over, her eyes curious but wary. "Her name was Lila Hart," Eli said, his voice low, rough with dust and memory. "She used to come through Juniper Flats with her father's wagon train. Always rode her own horse, always faster than the boys. One time she stopped here, wet from a thunderstorm not too different from tonight. I gave her shelter. Just like you." A breeze stirred the chimney, and the flames jumped. "She died 3 years ago," Eli said, "right out there in that canyon." He gestured with his chin toward the black window behind her. "Some folks say it was a bandit raid, but I know better. I was there." Cora's fingers tightened around the tin cup. "What happened?" she asked, voice barely more than a breath. Eli exhaled slow. His eyes didn't leave the fire. "I froze," he said simply. "It was me, her, and 4 men with pistols drawn. I had a rifle in my hand and I didn't fire, not fast enough, not straight enough. By the time I got off a shot, Lila was already on the ground." A beat passed. "The kind that drags your heart through gravel," Cora whispered. "Why are you telling me this?" Eli turned to her. His eyes were dry but red at the edges, like embers long buried. "Because guilt's a funny thing," he said. "It don't fade, just gets quieter like a broken horse learning not to buck. But every now and then you smell the same rain, you hear the same scream, and it bucks all over again." He stood, walked to the mantel, and ran a finger along a tiny wooden box tucked behind an oil lamp. Inside were ashes, Lila's locket, a scrap of her scarf, and a single .38 bullet he never fired in time. Then it happened. Knock, not loud, not frantic, 3 short, 1 long. Eli froze. The tin cup fell from Cora's hand, clanging to the floor. "No one knows that signal," Eli muttered. He stepped toward the door, rifle in hand, slow like a man moving through a memory. He didn't speak, just lifted the curtain a hair. Nothing, but then through the wood came a whisper. "Juniper still blooms." Eli's blood turned cold. Only one person ever said that to him. Only one man besides Eli knew the passphrase from that night 3 years ago, the night Lila Hart died. Jesse, his voice, older, deeper, but unmistakable. Eli threw the door open, and there he stood, soaked to the bone, mud up to his knees. A scar now ran along his jawline, but his eyes, those damn eyes, still carried the fire of a man who'd never stop running. Cora stepped forward instinctively, but stopped when she saw Eli's hand tighten on the rifle. Jesse raised both hands slowly. "Not here to fight, brother," he said. Eli didn't lower the rifle. "Then why are you here?" Jesse looked past him, into the house, at the woman in the blanket and the knife tucked under her arm. "Because if we don't move soon," Jesse said, "Pike's gonna make what happened to Lila look like a campfire tale." The cabin had never held 3 people, and so much silence. Jesse stood in the corner, dripping mud onto the pinewood floor, hat in hand like a boy caught sneaking home late. Cora kept her distance, perched on the edge of the bed, her eyes shifting between the brothers as if they might draw steel any second. Eli poured 3 cups of coffee. Only 2 got touched. "Start talkin'," Eli said, his voice low. Jesse sipped and winced. "You still brew it like it's punishment." "Good. Now spill it before I forget how to aim." Jesse set his tin cup down with a soft clang. "They've got Noah." Eli's hand froze halfway to his lips. "What?" "Town jail," Jesse said. "Locked up 2 days ago. Pike and Rake planted false charges, accused him of robbing the Ledger House Bank. Truth is that Ledger's got names. Real names. Folks who've been laundering through the saloon and railroad. Half the town's in it deep." Cora leaned forward. "So they arrested your brother to keep him quiet?" Jesse nodded. "Marshall's been bought. Same with Judge Tully. Ledger disappears, Noah gets buried under charges." Eli squinted at him. "And what's this got to do with you suddenly remembering how to knock?" Jesse unbuttoned his duster. Beneath the mud and soaked leather, pinned to his vest, a deputy's badge. Cora inhaled sharply. "You're a lawman?" "Was," Jesse muttered, "back before Pike hung a bounty on my neck for trying to file charges against him. Rode south, changed name, kept the badge." Eli stepped closer, jaw tight. "You left me." "Left her." Jesse didn't flinch. "I left because if I stayed, they'd hang me with you watching. I went to gather proof. Took longer than I planned." Cora looked between them, voice sharp. "Do you have it now, the proof?" Jesse pulled a weathered leather satchel from under his coat. Inside, newspaper clippings, letters, deposit slips. Names like Tully, Rake, even the preacher's brother in Gold Creek. "Everything's here," he said. "But it won't matter unless we get the real ledger from the vault." "Vault's inside the bank," Eli said, "surrounded day and night." "Not always," Jesse replied. "Friday night they move cash for the southern train. Pike empties the vault, opens the reserve. For a 2-hour window it's exposed." Cora stood, voice steady. "So we sneak in, take the ledger, use it to trade for Noah?" Jesse shook his head. "No trades. Once we've got the book, we go public. Pike, Tully, all of 'em burn together." Eli crossed his arms. "And if we fail?" Jesse looked at him, eyes dark as riverbed mud. "Then at least we go down doing something right." Outside, thunder cracked again, though the rain had long passed. The air smelled of ash and wet dirt. Eli walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The world beyond was still, but something felt wrong. Too still. Then he saw it. A shadow shifted beyond the barn. A figure there and gone in half a heartbeat. He turned back to Jesse and Cora. "Somebody's out there." They grabbed their rifles. No words, just instinct. Eli opened the door quietly. Rain-dripped leaves rustled. Horses snorted from the stable, but no footsteps, no movement. Then, on the cabin wall, just below the window, a single handprint. Red, smudged. Not blood, not paint. Mud. Fresh. The forge behind Olin's stable hadn't sung in months. Now it screamed. Each strike of Eli's hammer echoed like thunder in a canyon, sparks shooting from the steel as if the fire itself were lashing out. He worked without pause, bare arms streaked in soot, jaw clenched tight. The blade he shaped wasn't for cattle or fence posts. It was meant for something darker. Beside him, Jesse checked rounds, laid out maps, marked escape routes. Cora stitched leather into sheaths, hands moving with a steadiness that betrayed none of her nerves. They had till Friday, 3 days, 3 nights, and maybe one last chance to undo a decade of silence. "You sure this'll cut clean?" Jesse asked, nodding at the blade glowing orange on the anvil. Eli didn't look up. "Clean enough." The forge flared as Olin threw in fresh coal. "You boys act like you're planning a funeral." Eli wiped his brow. "We are." They'd taken over the old blacksmith shop, not for secrecy. It was too late for that. Whoever had left the muddy handprint was still out there. This was about message, about grit, about sending smoke into the sky so every man on Pike's payroll knew they were coming. "Tell me about the tunnels," Cora said, not looking up from her stitching. Jesse unrolled the blueprints of the town bank. "Old escape shaft runs under the vault. Got sealed up after the train robbery in '82, but the map shows a runoff channel near the old tannery. Might still be usable." "Or it might be a grave," Eli muttered. Cora nodded. "Either way, it's a way in." Outside, the wind began to shift. Warm air, dry, the kind that always came before a fire or a storm. From the barn loft, Birdie, a deaf-mute stable girl who Olin had raised since her parents vanished, gave a sharp whistle, 3 fingers in the air. "Riders?" Jesse asked. Birdie nodded once. Then she held up a small metal object, dull brass, glinting in the lantern light. A bullet, fresh, no casing. Jesse cursed under his breath. "Pike's men are scouting." Eli grabbed his coat. "We finish prep tonight. Tomorrow we move." That night, back in the cabin, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat alone by the fire, whittling the last sliver of ashwood into a new knife handle. His hands knew what to do, but his mind wandered. Back to Lila's voice, soft as rain, whispering about names for their unborn son, the same son he never got to name. He looked up when Cora walked in, her shadow long in the firelight. "You ain't the only one haunted," she said, sitting beside him. Eli didn't speak. Cora stared into the flames. "You ever wonder if maybe this whole place is cursed? This land, these names?" Eli nodded. "Every damn day." A moment passed. Then she reached into her coat and handed him something wrapped in cloth. Inside, a silver ring. Simple. Dent on one side. "Found it in my boot," she said. "Must have slipped there when I ran." He turned it over in his fingers, then handed it back. "You keep it. You got more days ahead than I do." She didn't argue. Outside, a white owl landed on the porch beam, head cocked unnaturally to one side, eyes glowing. It hooted once, sharply, then took off, toward town. The town of Sagebrush never truly slept. Not since Pike rolled in with his polished boots and dead eyes. At midnight, the only things awake were stray dogs, bar lamps flickering low, and the vault behind the First Union Bank. Eli, Jesse, and Cora crouched in the shadows behind the tannery ruins, where the wind carried the stink of old hides and gun oil. Cora pressed a finger to the stone wall, slick with algae and cold as bone. "This is it," she whispered, "the runoff shaft." Jesse unscrewed the grate. It groaned, louder than a prayer in church. They paused, listened. Nothing but the rustle of tumbleweed. "In and out," Eli muttered. "No heroics." They dropped into the tunnel, boots splashing into ankle-deep water. The air turned thick with mold and iron. Jesse held the lantern low, illuminating carvings in the stone, names, tally marks, one cross etched over a child's height. "How many tried this way before?" Cora asked. "Too many," Jesse said. They reached the junction under the vault. A rusted ladder led upward into darkness. Jesse climbed first, tools strapped to his back like a gunslinger's cross. He worked fast, clockwork hands and breath held tight. One wrong twist and the whole damn building might scream. Above them, the bank sat hollow as a coffin, its guards dozing by the stove with shotguns on their laps. But as the floor hatch eased open with a soft click, someone else was watching. Cora felt it first, a weight, A shift in air, like a breath held too long. She turned fast, but saw nothing. Inside the vault, they moved like shadows. Jessie cracked the safe in under 3 minutes. An old model, easily outsmarted. Inside, the ledger, bound in red leather, heavy with names. And something else, a small photo tucked between pages. Cora picked it up. It showed a boy, eyes wide, hair slicked back, a smudge of ink across his cheek. Noah, still alive. Jessie grabbed her arm. "We need to go." As they descended the ladder, the floor above creaked, not from them. Another step, heavier, deliberate. Back in the tunnel, Eli paused. "Go." Cora hesitated. "What about now?" They bolted through the shaft. As boots struck above them, fast and furious. A lantern tipped. Oil spilled. Flames licked the wooden floorboards. When they emerged from the runoff at the creek, firelight was already dancing on the windows of the bank. Pike's men were shouting, bells clanged, but in the shadows near the boarding house porch stood a figure, too still to be drunk, too quiet to be law, not Iris and not alone. The sky bled copper over sagebrush when Pike returned. Eli stood on the porch with a rifle in hand, boots anchored in the dirt like fence posts. Behind him, Cora loaded rounds into a battered revolver, her fingers steady now, no longer the trembling hands of a bride in the rain. They'd bought maybe 4 hours of quiet since the bank job, enough time to breathe, enough time to realize they'd poked a wolf nest barehanded, and now the wolves were here. Dust rolled down Main Street like a living thing. Pike's men emerged first, 10 of them, maybe 12, riding 2 by 2, eyes hidden behind dust goggles and hatred. Pike led the column, long black coat dragging behind him like a death shroud. He stopped 10 paces from the gate. "Thought I smelled smoke," he called out. Turns out it was just the last breath of a dying lie. Eli didn't blink. "You got a warrant?" Pike grinned, teeth too white. "I got bullets. Want me to write your name on one?" From behind the barn came a sharp whistle. "Jessie, signal, ready." Cora shifted her stance, but something wasn't right. The wind changed. The birds fell silent. Then came it, faint at first, a second rhythm of hooves, heavier, farther out. Not Pike's men. A new sound. "Marshal?" Cora whispered. "No," Eli murmured. "Too early, too fast." Pike heard it too. He turned his head just enough to show unease, then barked, "Stand firm!" But dust was rising at the edge of town. South Trail. 1 rider. No, 3, 5. A different formation. Not lawmen, not ranchers, but something else entirely. Suddenly a gunshot cracked from the hayloft. Warning or misfire, no one knew. It was enough. Pike's men reached for their guns. Eli fired first. The air lit up with muzzle flashes. Horses screamed. Cora rolled behind the trough, returned fire, clipped the leg of a man aiming for Jessie. Jessie ducked low, shouted, "Behind the wagon." The gate splintered. A lantern crashed. The stranger from last night emerged from the smoke, pistols drawn. He didn't speak, just shot. 2 clean, quick ones into the chest of a gunman reaching for Cora. Pike cursed and dove for cover. The new riders barreled in, not law, not outlaw, mercs maybe, or worse. In the blur of dust and bullets, Eli caught sight of a strange emblem on the lead rider's saddle. 3 arrows crossed over a sunburst, same as the glove left behind. The shootout lasted under 2 minutes, then silence. Pike had vanished, smoke and blood in his wake. 5 men down. 2 horses limping, 1 stranger gone as quick as he came. Cora stood slowly, eyes wide. Eli wiped blood from his lip. "We ain't done." Jessie knelt beside a fallen man, pulled something from his vest. A map, not of sagebrush, but of Black Hollow Mine. The sun came up hard that morning, like it meant to burn off every lie still clinging to sagebrush. Eli stood with Jessie and Cora on the ridge overlooking the trail to Black Hollow. The map they'd pulled off Pike's dead man trembled in the wind, corners fluttering like a warning. Beside it lay the rusted badge marked N.H. Noah Hart. "He's alive," Cora whispered, voice shaky but sure. They're keeping him out there. Eli stared at the ink-stained paper, jaw tight. Then we ride. Before Jesse could swing his leg over the saddle, a voice rang out from below. Eli Mercer! They turned. A column of horses kicked dust into the early light. In front rode a man in a duster, the color of dried blood, a martial star shining like fire pinned to his chest. Marshal Dane Harwood, Jesse muttered. Last time I saw him, he shot a man for sneezing too loud. The marshal pulled up hard, his men forming a line behind him. Eli Mercer, he called again, voice like gravel. Step forward. I got federal authority and a warrant. Eli didn't flinch. Warrant for what? Murder, bank robbery, harboring fugitives, and aiding a wanted woman. His eyes flicked to Cora. You know damn well who she is. The sun climbed higher. It hit Cora's face. Her eyes didn't blink. I ran because I had no choice, she said. I never killed nobody who didn't raise a hand first. That's for the court to decide, miss. No, Eli said, stepping forward. That's for me. The marshal dismounted, slow. You interfering, rancher. I'm intervening. They stood 5 feet apart, 2 old scars from different wars. Neither blinked. You drawing on a badge, Mercer? Depends if the badge forgets how to weigh truth. Silence. A horse shifted. Wind howled through the rocks. The marshal lifted his hand, not to draw, but to signal. One of his men tossed something through the air. A folded sheet of paper. Jesse caught it. It was another warrant, but not for Cora, this one named Pike Henson. Wanted for kidnapping, conspiracy, extortion, and the attempted murder of Noah Hart. Cora's knees gave out. Eli caught her. The marshal looked tired now, the kind of tired that sits in bones. I'm not here for you, he said softly. I'm here for Pike. I've been chasing him since New Mexico. Figured he'd circle back here. You just stirred the hornet nest early. Eli stared hard. Then help us. The marshal raised an eyebrow. Cora stood again, her voice hoarse. Please. Dane Harwood squinted into the sun. Then without a word, he turned to his men. We ride for Black Hollow by dusk, lock and load. The trail to Black Hollow twisted like a scar through the hills, narrow and choked with thorn brush, the kind of place you didn't ride into unless you had something to bury or something to dig up. Eli rode point, rifle strapped across his back. Behind him, Jesse lit a lantern, the yellow glow swaying with every hoofbeat. Cora rode last, her fingers clenched white on the reins. The map of the old mining shafts burned into her mind like a brand. No one spoke. Even the marshal, riding off to the side, seemed to know better than to break the silence, the kind of hush you only hear before a storm or a gunfight. By the time they reached the outer shaft, night had fallen. A cold, damp wind whistled from inside the tunnel, carrying the scent of rust, mold, and something else. Something older. He's in there, the scout had said. Far chamber, chained to the old rail line. Eli stepped down first, lantern held high. The light flickered against jagged walls, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts. Jesse handed out cartridges one by one. Once we're in, we're blind to daylight. Keep your ears sharp and your boots quiet. Cora nodded, tucking a small pistol into her waistband. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair pulled back with a leather string. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like vengeance in a heartbeat's delay. They entered single file. Water dripped from the ceiling. The sound echoed down the shaft, like a clock ticking in a room with no time. Then, movement. A figure darted between beams. "Dilly!" Cora hissed. "He's still guarding the place." The marshal moved like a panther, hand to his revolver. But before anyone could blink, a flare lit up the far end of the tunnel. "Hello, lovebirds," Dilly's voice sang out, warped by the hollow. "You made it just in time." A metallic snap echoed, then a hiss. Fuse line. Dynamite. "Back!" Eli barked, shoving Cora to the wall. Jesse dove sideways, lantern crashing to the ground. But nothing happened. The hiss stopped short. Just silence again. Cora's heart slammed in her chest. "That wasn't a bluff," Eli said. "He wired this place up like a trap." From the shadows, a voice cracked. "Noah, help me." They turned toward it. There, slumped against a rail cart, was Noah Hart. Thin, bruised, one eye swollen shut, but breathing. Cora choked back a sob. Jesse ran forward, but stopped, because Noah wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure, Pike Henson, bloodied but standing like a revenant from some old nightmare. He smiled. "Family reunion," Pike said coldly, cocking his rifle. "Shame it has to end in a tomb." The hiss of the fuse roared louder than thunder in that narrow shaft. It spat sparks like a rattlesnake's warning, writhing its way toward a bundle of dynamite strapped to a timber beam. Eli moved first. He always did. He lunged for the fuse with his gloved hand, crushed it just inches from the charge. His breath came hard. Too close. Too damn close. But Pike was already moving. He stepped forward, dragging Noah by the collar like a rag doll, rifle barrel pressed to the boy's throat. "One more step," Pike said, voice raw and soaked in blood, "and I paint this shaft red." Cora froze. Her hand hovered inches from her pistol. She could see the tremble in Noah's arms, the cuts on his wrists where the cuffs had bitten deep. But his eyes, those eyes still had fight. "You came all this way," Pike sneered, "risked your lives, burned bridges, stole ledgers, crossed lawmen. For what? This sack of bones? He ain't worth it." Cora took a breath that felt like swallowing fire. "He's worth more than you'll ever be." Pike laughed. "He's just like me." "No," Jesse growled, stepping into the light. "He's still got people who believe in him." The tunnel shook. A deep rumble from somewhere above. Dilly had vanished into the rock, probably pulled another line. The whole place could come down any second. Eli looked at Pike, eyes narrowed. "You don't want to die down here, Henson. Let the boy go." But Pike's smile twisted into something dark. "Die? I died 10 years ago, Marshal. This here's just the echo." He shoved Noah forward and raised the rifle. A shot rang out, then another. Pike staggered back, his chest blooming red. He fell against the rail cart, slid down slowly. His breath rattled once, then never again. Eli lowered his revolver. Cora ran to Noah, threw her arms around him, sobbing into the blood-stained fabric of his shirt. "I got you," she whispered. "I got you now." Jesse scanned the shadows. "Where the hell's Dilly?" As if summoned, a laugh echoed from the depths. "Can't kill what you can't catch." Then came the second rumble. This one wasn't distant. It was here. Beams snapped. Dust exploded from the ceiling. A support column buckled like wet matchstick. "Run!" Eli shouted. They ran. Rocks tumbled. Lantern lights swung wildly. Behind them, stone devoured timber, collapsing like judgment from the heavens. Cora clutched Noah. Jesse pulled her by the arm. Eli covered their rear, firing blindly at shadows that might have been Dilly, or just the devil taking form. They burst from the shaft just as the entrance gave in, coughing, bleeding, and blinking into the rising sun. Black Hollow had closed its mouth, and it had taken Pike with it. The morning light came slow, crawling over the ridge like an old man waking from troubled dreams. Juniper Flats lay quiet, too quiet. No rooster crowed, no wind stirred the chapel bell. Just the sound of 3 men's boots scuffing the dirt, echoing like memory across the hollow. Eli was first out of the collapsed mine, his arm around Noah, steadying the boy who looked more ghost than flesh. Behind them, Jesse limped out, dragging Dilly in irons. The outlaw no longer snarled. His eyes held nothing, like a man who'd seen the bottom of hell and found it familiar. From the hill, the church bell rang out, 3 low, measured tolls. Folks stepped out of their doors, hands over hearts, hats in hand. No one spoke, but in their silence was something sacred, something like understanding. Cora ran, barefoot over the damp earth. She reached Noah and clutched him like she'd lost him yesterday and found him in a dream. Her tears cut trails through the dirt on his cheeks, leaving behind soft rivers of relief. Marshal Boone rode in not long after, coat torn, face bruised. He dismounted slow, eyes scanning the ruined shaft. The shackled man, the dust-covered faces. His gaze landed on Eli. "Reckon I owe you a bottle," he muttered, voice gruff, "and a hell of an apology." In the little chapel, Jesse sat alone, head in his hands. His badge rested on the pew beside him, dull in the afternoon light. Cora brought him a tin cup of water, set it down without a word. She didn't sit, just stood there, letting silence do what words couldn't. By sunset, the town gathered without summons. No trial, no jury. Dilly sat shackled to the jail rail, Marshal standing guard. The people didn't jeer or shout. They watched, quietly, that kind of quiet that says we see what you are, and we won't forget. Later that night, Eli heard a knock, soft, rhythmic. He opened the door to find nothing but a white dove perched on the rail, a slip of paper tied to its leg. He unrolled it, just 4 words in tight ink. "It ain't over yet." Eli stood in the doorway, reading it once more under the pale light. He didn't crumple it, didn't burn it, just folded it again and slipped it in his coat. The dove fluttered off into the night sky, heading west, toward the horizon where this story had begun, and maybe hadn't finished. Juniper Flats had changed, though not loudly, the kind of change that settles in like spring thaw, quiet but sure. Dust still danced in the streets, and the saloon piano still missed its high E key, but folks walked a little straighter, spoke a little softer, and nodded to one another like they'd all survived the same storm. The chapel had been patched, its old bell hung anew, and inside, on a calm Sunday morning, a handful of townsfolk gathered, not for a sermon, but for something gentler. Eli stood near the front, stiff in a pressed shirt he hadn't worn since his last cattle auction. Cora wore a pale blue dress, her hair pinned up with quiet care. Noah stood between them, fidgeting with the sleeves of his jacket, trying to look older than 16. It wasn't much of a wedding, no choir, no bouquet, no preacher with loud words. Just Marshal Boone, reading from a worn Bible, voice gravel low and warm. The kind of ceremony that felt like 2 rivers meeting in the same canyon after a long, crooked journey. "I reckon," Boone said as he closed the book, "what's stitched together in hardship holds tighter than silk ever could." Cora smiled, eyes glassy but brave. Eli just nodded. Words had always been too slippery for moments like this. They stepped outside, the chapel doors creaking open to bright sunlight. Their shadows stretched long across the dry earth side by side, then blended into one. Folks clapped, softly, respectfully. Jesse gave a half smile, still walking with a limp, but standing straighter than ever. Miss Iris handed Cora a bundle of fresh lavender. Olin tipped his hat and muttered something about "finally." But it was Noah's gift that made Eli pause. The boy had carved 2 tiny horses out of scrap wood, sanded smooth, painted with shaky hands. One was marked with a scar across its flank. The other had a tiny white flower tucked behind its ear. "They belong on your mantle," he said, voice just above a whisper. Before Eli could answer, his eyes caught something at the edge of town. A man, tall in a black duster, hat low over his brow. He stood still as stone, watching from the far end of the street, and when Eli looked straight at him, the man turned, slow and silent, and walked away. No words, no threat, just that heavy, lingering presence, like unfinished business wearing boots. Eli held Cora's hand a little tighter. "Who was that?" she asked. "Not sure yet," Eli said, voice calm, "but I reckon we'll find out." As the sun dipped low and lanterns flickered on, music began to rise from Iris's porch. Fiddles and banjos played old songs, and someone passed around peach cobbler in tin plates. The town danced, not wildly, but like folks who had nearly lost each other and knew better now. That night, Eli and Cora sat side by side on their porch, watching the stars burn bright over the open plains. Behind them, the house was warm. Ahead of them, the night was wide. They waited until spring bloomed in full, when the sagebrush turned silver green and the hills smelled like sweet dust and old hope, before they made the ride out to Sagebrush Ridge. Cora packed a small basket, just bread, jerky, and a folded piece of her wedding dress. Eli didn't say much, only checked the saddlebags twice and tied Lila's cross to the saddle horn with steady hands. Noah rode ahead, all long legs and teenage bravado, but he slowed when they reached the rise. Some places quiet a man, no matter his age. The ridge hadn't changed. Still windswept and open to the sky. Still full of silence that made your bones remember things you tried to forget. Eli dismounted first. He walked slow, his boots crunching dry grass, and stopped at the grave marked by a cedar post and a handful of river stones. He stood there for a long while. Cora joined him, laying the strip of white lace across the stones. It fluttered in the wind like a ghost's whisper, soft, persistent, not quite gone. "She would have liked you," Eli said, barely above a hush. Cora reached for his hand. "I like to think she sent me." They didn't speak for a while after that, just sat on a fallen log, shared quiet sips of coffee from a dented tin cup, and let the land speak. Juniper Flats shimmered in the distance, small and peaceful, a town stitched back together by forgiveness and fire. As the sun dipped low and turned the hills gold, Eli pulled something from his coat pocket, a slip of paper, creased and worn. It was the note from the dove. "Still think about this?" Cora asked. "Most days," he answered. "Doesn't feel like it's finished." "You reckon it's a warning?" Eli stared toward the horizon. "Maybe, or maybe it's a reminder." "Of what?" He turned to her. "That peace ain't something you're handed. You build it, nail by nail, word by word, and you guard it like it's the last fire on a cold night." A hawk cried overhead, slicing the silence. They stood, brushed the dust from their coats, and turned toward home. As they mounted up, a gust of wind kicked through the ridge, lifting the lace and carrying it upward in a slow, swirling dance. For a moment, it hovered, then drifted down into a clump of wildflowers. Eli looked back once more, then touched his hat brim to the grave. Back at the house, the porch light flickered on with the evening. The horses whinnied softly as they approached, and the barn cat stretched from its perch on the rail. The old windmill turned lazy in the dusk. Inside, on the mantel, sat the two carved horses, one scarred, one adorned, and beside them, framed in cedar, a single line of handwriting. "What begins in the rain must be remembered in the light." From far off down the valley came the faint rhythm of hooves, not hurried, not threatening, just a rider on the road. And Eli, he didn't flinch. He only rocked back in his chair, wrapped Cora's shawl tighter around her shoulders, and said, "Let 'em come. We've still got one story left in us." And just like that, the wind settled, the dust laid low, and peace came back to Juniper Flats. Not loud, not proud, just quiet enough for a man like Eli to breathe again. Some wounds heal slow, some never do, but sometimes, just sometimes, a stranger at your door can change everything. If this story touched you, even in a small way, drop a simple 1 in the comments. Or share what part hit you the hardest. We read every word, and out here by the firelight, Stories ain't done till someone listens.